That one and that one. Okay. I'm gone for a couple days, and they decide to drop a blog supposedly talking about 5v5 and 6v6. Hard to avoid all of this for me. I haven't even bothered looking at this. I find it really funny that they decide to drop this during Marvel Rivals beta. One of their betas going on. Like I said, I haven't talked. Not any of this. I haven't seen any of this. I was down in Texas having fun at the Anime Fest. And this drops. Haven't looked at it at all. So let's just. Everyone's been a lot of talk about 6v6 lately, and it's only intensified in recent weeks since we posted our latest director's take and made a Twitter post was a promise to talk about it in the future. Now is the future, and this is the next piece. So let's get into it. Let's not get into it quite yet. I am hoping for one of two things here. I'm hoping that they either do A or B. A, if they stay with 5v5, to rework tanks. Do not giga buff them anymore. Giving them increased stats, increased numbers is not going to work. It doesn't matter how much damage Reinhardt does, he's still going to lack tools to deal with Mauga, Diva, Ramatra. He just doesn't win those matchups because he wasn't designed to solo tank and deal with these situations by himself. So you need to properly rework these characters if you want to stay 5v5. Now if we're going to go 6v6, yes, it's going to be clunky and a little bit bad and out of balance because you have been trying to force 5v5 down our throats without properly reworking these characters. So I don't care which side they go to. I'm just hoping that whichever side we go to, that they make a good choice and not just try to force anything down our throats. Which is what they've been doing. They've been trying to force 5v5 and numbers. It's not working. Everybody's just boning each other. Support has so much denial that it's absurd. And DPS has the passive to bone over support from healing, so they just become heal bots on tanks. And then tanks can't do anything despite having these large health pools, because if they look away from the Mauga for 1 second, they get obliterated. Alright. This is a pretty complex and nuanced topic, and it gets to the beating heart of what makes this game tick. Our players have different opinions and preferences about the ideal number of players in an Overwatch match, and so does our team. We're a microzone of the border community. Microcosm. I can't English. We have the border community and discuss this internally. I'm hoping that this piece will serve as an introduction to our own discussions and a jumping off point to engage with all of you. I'd also like to set a few expectations and ground rules. First, it's pretty long. Creators are going to lose their voices reading this one aloud. If you'd like a TLDR, the what's next section would suffice. Secondly, I'm not here to tell you what you ought to like or even what's empirically better. This is a game, and our own preference for fun is relative to your own taste, ability, and experience. Lastly, there are years of decisions that affect such a fundamental piece of Overwatch. Some of you might be intimately aware of these, while others might not. Before diving in, I like to set the stage and give some context for some of the larger changes to the game that ultimately accumulated in the 5v5 format we have today. There have been 3 large format changes to Overwatch, and the first happened shortly after the game launched. There were hero limits. Before this, we could be any number of a particular hero on one time. You could have 6 Genji, 6 Reinhardts. If my memory serves right, the winner of Team 4's first internal tournament was 1 Winston, 5 Zenyatas. We called it Quinstons, and Yada orbs stacked with no cap to healing at the time. This is like super early Overwatch before Brig decided to hit the stage and just actually make DPS unplayable. Overwatch heroes have very distinct kits with impactful abilities. Stacking abilities could be fun, but it posed a challenge to balancing many of those abilities in games. So this is just like the past. Okay, we're not talking enough about the past. Yes, I get it, 6v6 or 5v5, but this is too far back. We are talking about the future of this game, the health of this game, and you want to talk about having fun? People aren't having fun with this game anymore. That's why they're looking at Marvel Rivals. That's why their beta is completely filled. That's why fucking Valve is deciding to throw their hat into the ring of this. They announced that they were going to do a game, and that fucking shocked even me. I was like, oh my goodness, Valve's doing something? Even they know Overwatch is fucking up. Second large change to the game's format was the move from open queue to role queue, which limited team compositions to 2 heroes from each role. Before role queue, there was no enforced 2-2-2 team comps, and players had the freedom to select any role they liked once they loaded into a match. With open queue, teams had a lot of freedom of choice about what hero team compositions to play until Brig dropped and forced goats, and you either ran that or got ran over. Prior to implementing role queue, there was a stark imbalance of the number of people playing each role with each match. Damage was by far, and still is today, the most popular role, and tank was by far the least popular. In fact, seeing matches with 5 or even 6 damage players on each team was not uncommon. It's not that tank isn't unpopular, it's just that it's been so unfun. I don't know. This role imbalance frequently led to wildly imbalanced matches between teams. The game played better when heroes from all 3 roles were selected. The disparity caused social issues as players would try to pressure others into playing tank or support roles, even if they didn't want to. It made balancing heroes more difficult, since we couldn't balance around a certain role ratio for each of them, and it even made introducing new heroes more difficult, since any new hero kit had to take into consideration hundreds of different team comps and abilities that could overlap with it. The movement to role queue format was aimed to mitigate these challenges. Moving to role queue solved many of these problems. No, it didn't. And added some additional benefits to the game. Yeah, DPS became playable. Because they forced it in after Brig was manhandling the entire game for a whole year. Fuck off. With role queue in place, matchmaking is based on skill within a given role, not just skill overall. Some players have wildly different skill ratings per role, so the ability to matchmake around set roles provides a big measurable boost in match quality. Role queue also solidified the identity of each role, and the fantasy of doing that role's job became clearer. Not just skill overall. Matchmaking is based on skill within a given role, not just skill overall. So you acknowledge that. And then give us characters like Mauga later on in Lifeweaver, who are just brain dead characters, and characters like Alari, who just sets up her pylon and gets to sit there for no reason. Although with Juno, I didn't do anything for Juno because this is what I was mainly waiting for. Juno, I enjoyed her, liked her, yet very reminiscent of Ana. She seems like a actually balanced and healthy character for the game. Proactivity, nothing about denial. I love that. No denial whatsoever, no get out of jail free card. I loved her. However, the switch to role queue system did have some downsides, the largest of which was longer queue times. Prior to role queue, the matchmaker just needed to find 12 players of similar skill levels in order to put matches together. Yeah, DPS became playable after a year of being manhandled by 3 tanks and 3 supports. So yeah, DPS was the most picked, and nobody else wanted to play support or tank. It needed to find 4 players of each role to make a match. The total number of players queuing has no effect on this. It's almost solely governed by the ratio of people queuing for the least popular role. The total number of players queuing has no effect on this. What do you mean? Yeah, if everybody's queuing for DPS, you're not gonna fucking find a game. If everybody's queuing for support, you're not gonna find a game. It's the same thing. I'm mid-diamond. My matches, to find a fucking match is like 5 to 10 minutes. Because nobody wants to play tank. What do you mean? The ratio of people queuing for the least popular... Yeah. The total number of players queuing has no effect. It's governed by the ratio of people Yeah, people aren't queuing for the fucking role. What? So yes, it is. What the fuck? Whatever. The team tried to address this imbalance in various ways. We introduced a priority pass system that gave players who played low demand roles, tank, a shorter queue when they switched to DPS. But that didn't matter either because people would stack like 50 tickets and then that's all they would use. That's why I have this here. Reading anything that comes out of their mouth is brain numbing. I need something to keep me calm. This had a positive effect for several weeks, but its influence quickly faded. We also introduced systems to reward players for playing tank, eventually giving them a loot box and a bunch of XP for queuing for that role. Yeah, for tank. Nobody wanted to play it. None of these were able to put a dent in the demand for playing DPS. Damage queue times drifted a bit lower over time, but much of this was due to introducing of open queue competitive and a permanent loss of damage players unwilling to wait that long for a match. There were additional drawbacks with role queue. I mentioned earlier that many of our decisions made improvements to the game at the cost of match variety and player freedom. Team compositions were now locked to 2-2-2. This was another step to more consistent experience within Overwatch, but sometimes consistency can start to feel samey. There were some pretty exciting metas in the pre-role queue world, and swapping to a hero to a different role mid-match was often a much bigger change and more exciting. I mean, we have open queue in the game. We have open queue, we have competitive open queue. Oh wait, it's all tanks and supports. Oh my goodness. It's 4 tanks, 1 Moira. That's all it is. Could there be an in-between version that softens the original problems without completely solving them and also isn't quite as restrictive as current role queue system? The third major format change. These challenges as well as longer queue times led us to the third and most recent major format change to the game. The shift from 6v6 to 5v5. This is almost a blog within a blog, but we're going to cover 3 things. Why we switched to 5v5, queue times after the switch to 5v5, what the team thinks about 6v6. You cannot change my mind that at this point, that 5v5 was made to make this game Overwatch 2. It is the only thing now making it Overwatch 2. You can't change my mind. Alright, let me find a different song here. Ooh. Ooh, you're loud. There we go. There were many reasons behind the transition to 5v5. When we launched Overwatch 2, we talked about the greater individual agency that players could have in 5v5. Overwatch is a team sport and it requires players to really rely on each other. Where'd this one go? Could have of team sport requires players to rely on each other to be successful. This was even more the case previously, and the game could be frustrating if your team was out of sync. Many times, fights in 6v6 couldn't resolve until ultimate abilities came online. Correct that, until ultimate combos could be executed to break through 2 tanks worth of mitigation, supported by high uncontested healing output. They at least acknowledge that. The world of 6v6 could have really high highs, but really low lows. One of the design goals of 5v5 was try to raise that floor, even though it was at the expense of some high moments. Nerf Sigma. Nerf Orisa, get rid of Baptiste's immortality, and nerf Brig. That's all you had to do. Everyone else was fine. You couldn't attack the backline. You couldn't go for the backline. You had to deal with immortality and a character that could stun you and do 80% of your health if you dare got close to her. Overwatch 2 also has greater emphasis on FPS gameplay. There's less damage mitigation and CC. Less damage mitigation. That's why we put characters like Kiriko and Lifeweaver in. Don't you guys love those characters who have denial, who just mitigate damage? And then we put in Malga, who has damage mitigation, damage reduction. Oh, it's so cool. And players get to shoot at enemies more. Crowd control could take players out of the game for extended periods of time, especially when they were chained back to back. A 5-second Sombra hack may freeze on her primary fire. Brick Bash, Ana Sleep, Orisa Halt, and Sigma Rock could all happen consecutively to one player. It still can. Get hacked. Get slowed down. If a Brig's ulting, you can get bashed, you can get slept, and then you can either get javelin speared or Sigma rocked. Those can still happen. What? Typically, a tank could often survive this onslaught, at least in game. Their real life mental health was another story. Yeah, I mean, it's still the same thing. What the fuck? Damage heroes often complain that their role was the least impactful relative to the strengths of super powerful tank synergies and support heroes undoing their playmaking. It's the exact same. You have characters like Lifeweaver and Kiriko who can sit in the backline. You can literally... I have had games where I do not even see a fucking Lifeweaver, but the second I go to kill that DPS, whoop! Like, he's getting fucking pulled on his child leash, dude. His fucking mom's pulling him back. And now you can't do anything to him. So your eyes are hard carrying on the game, or it really feels like you're not doing anything. It's still the same. The emphasis on ability, cooldown management, ult tracking, shooting barriers instead of players, and not big enough timing for windows to just shoot enemies and get elims were all factors that contributed to this feeling. Now it's just with one tank, though. Support heroes also had to focus almost exclusively on healing, since there were bigger team health pools and more incoming damage on the field. With the additional tank player in 5v5, they have more agency to add some damage or duel other heroes. But you increased the health pools of everything and then added the DPS passive on top of that, which makes healing slower, so now they're spending just as much time healing than doing other things. And if there's like a Roadhog or a Mauga, you can't look away for a second, otherwise they're gone like that. So a character like Mercy is unplayable right now. Mercy can't be played. She's so bad. Her pocket playstyle just isn't good. I don't know what they're talking about. Tank synergy wasn't always fun. It slowed the game down and stabilized it, but sometimes it absolutely ground it to a halt. People point to the double shield meta as an example of this. It's the only example that they point to. It wasn't just about double shields, though. The ability to stack a very defensive heavy lineup, especially in game modes that required a team to push through a small choke, caused a lot of matches to feel like there was no progress at all. This game is faster now and doesn't typically stall out. It feels like there is more room to move around a map without the need to earn every inch of it in 5v5 fights. 5v5 fights are often less focused on moving around in a death ball formation, and there is more room to take angles, flanks, and duel other players. No, there isn't. No, there isn't. You have to pick Sombra and track down the Life Weaver that's just sitting in the back line. What are you talking about? Otherwise, your tank's not going to be able to do anything because both Maugas are just sitting right there in front of each other. In a mirror matchup, the tanks are like pretty much forced to look at each other. I feel like. And I feel like if you look away or try to do something, you try to make a play, you go on an off angle or something, you just get punished for it. And it's really only DPS that can take angles, flank, and duel other players. Tanks can't do that, supports can't do that, and only specific DPS can do that, I feel like, right now. While 6v6 can have high moments, it's also hard to follow. Tracking 9 other players is easier than 11. There are fewer visual effects on screen, especially during big team fights. That's why we added Mauga. That's why we added Kiriko that have these lanes of nonsense going on. That's why we added Mauga with the big cage, just the big shield. That's why we added Lifeweaver with the big tree. That's why we're putting in Juno, who has the giant fucking GTA 5 laser death beam. If there's 2 Junos, 2 Kirikos, and a fucking Mauga on each team, dude, and they all decide to pop ults at the same time, dude. Oh my goodness, good luck. One of the biggest benefits of 5v5 was dramatically reduced queue times. Guys, it reduced the queue time because we cut a player from the team. Did you know? It needs 2 less people because we cut them. So yes, you need 2 less people. Oh my goodness. Oh, queue time data and chart content. What the hell? Chart below shows ranked play queue times per role after the introduction of role queue to Overwatch in 2019 compared to queue times per role in Overwatch 2's 5v5 format. As you can see, the shift to 5v5 role queue dramatically reduced queue times for players in all roles. Orange is DPS, green is support, blue is tank. Well, yeah. What the fuck? What's the point of this? You cut 2 players from the team. So yes, it's gonna reduce the queue times for everybody else. The biggest factor driving the difference between Overwatch and Overwatch 2 queue times is the ratio of players queuing for each match. We hear players speculate that long queue times are a result of not enough players playing Overwatch. That isn't the case, but instead that relevating to other roles. Damn. Players generally queue tank less, leading to longer wait times for all while we wait for tank to free up to find a proper match. So in practice, the actual ratio of players queuing for tank, damage, and support is much closer to the current 1-2-2 format than the previous 2-2-2 format. As a result, the 5v5 role queue format better mirrors actual players' interest in each roles and making the switch resulted in shorter queues. But you cut a player. What do you mean? Ah! Okay. Yeah. I took an ingredient off the sandwich. I can make the sandwich faster. The fuck? The sharp drop-off in queue times in October of 22 is when Overwatch 2 along with 5v5 shipped. The queue times of all heroes dropped and now are much shorter than they were in 6v6 world. This is almost because the games require one less tank in a match. If you look at the current queue times, you can see that there's still a lack of tanks compared to other roles. Just flipping the switch and returning to 6v6 would likely cause a return to previous queue times or worse. I removed an ingredient from the sandwich so I can make it faster. I make the sandwich faster. Oh my fucking goodness, dude. Regardless of the amount of players in-game, queue times are always reflective of how many people are queued per role. In other words, the main driver of increased queue times. It also dictates if your fucking game is doing well or how good the role is. Nobody wants to queue for tank because it's awful. Thoughts on 6v6? Yes. Yes. The game started its life with 6 players on each team. I discussed why we moved away from 6v6, but that doesn't mean it's without any merit. There were moments and madness that could happen while 12 players in a match that just don't quite coalesce when there are 10. It was almost too much to keep track of. It was too much to keep track of at times. It could still feel that way. What are you talking about? It still feels that way. There was an extra player to take up a bit of the slack. Part of the chaos allowed for players to feel less pressure in the match. There was an extra player to take up a bit of slack for someone that was performing poorly. Since that player was a tank, they had quite a bit of impact. There were a lot more hit points and offensive capabilities to burn through, which had a stabilizing effect on gameplay. Teams would fold a bit slower than they do now. What? Unless you have an Ana on your team, that 700 HP Roadhog was a 40% damage reduction heal is not gonna go down. Especially if he has a Kiriko with him. We want some of the issues of tank synergy earlier, but having 2 of them allowed one to focus on protecting their backline while the other held ground or pushed into the enemy team. The tank role had a lot of depth in understanding how to work with the other tank on the team. This part of the mastery curve took a long time to learn for the small group of people devoted to it. That was part of the allure. Yes, you were playing chess. We're playing checkers in this one. There's only one tank. There's only so much you can do on one tank. But when you have 2, it's more fun. The D.Va can peel back. The Winston can go in. The Wrecking Ball can take an off angle. We mentioned the difficulty in balancing tanks for 6v6 earlier, but the past year and a half has shown us that there are issues with balancing tanks for 5v5 as well. For much of Overwatch 2, they have been fairly balanced. Bullshit! But when one of them becomes powerful outlier like Mauga, that can be felt strongly in the world of one tank. Fairly balanced. Bullshit! Why did Wrecking Ball need to get a buff after his rework? Why are some tanks absolutely godlike while others are just fucking left behind? Malga is not fairly balanced. Roadhog isn't fairly balanced. Sigma isn't. Orisa isn't. What's next? A lot of setup. Because of the challenge mentioned previously, we are focused on making 5v5 the best experience that it can be. However, because we operate as a service to our players, we always remain open-minded to re-evaluating our decisions based on your actions and feedback to give you the best game experience we can. Rather than introduce a disruptive permanent change to the game, we'd prefer to explore the space further and make changes based on that exploration. Rather than introduce a disruptive permanent change to the game. 5v5. You haven't said anything about this, because if you said that you would have stayed 5v5, I guarantee you a huge chunk of the player base would have uninstalled. I would have been one of them for sure. This is the only reason why I'm hanging on, is because they haven't said anything about the 5v5 or 6v6, whether they're thinking about 6v6 or going to stay with 5v5. It's bullshit. Why not put previous forms of 6v6 in the game in order to gauge the results? We agree, and based on your feedback, we're exploring how we can test different forms of 6v6 in the game to gauge the results. This is taking some time, however, for reasons that may not be readily apparent. That's what I'm fucking waiting for, baby. I'll drink to that. They are looking at 6v6. I will take it. The first and honestly largest reason is the need to do this in a way that allows the game to have optimized technical performance. I'm referring to frame rate and memory constraints. With 12 players in a match, there have been quite few upgrades and additional. I'm willing to eat those if like the game is going to be better. If we can go back to 6v6. Causing game to underperform on older systems. I think people are willing to eat a downgrade in some graphics and UIs if we go back to 6v6. If the game is going to be in a better spot and be enjoyable and playable, I think people are willing to eat some downgrades. Another issue is one that still gives me anxiety about opening this Pandora's box, is what to do with queue times if enough players prefer 6v6 to keep some form of it around. What to do with the queue times? Okay. They were not able to solve this issue previously. Well, it's become worse with 5v5 as well. No guarantee that they will work. Just do a quick play hacked. Oh wait, you took out a whole mode. You had an experimental card that you took out. Oh my goodness. Wow. Is there a world where people are willing to live with long queue times to play this format? Maybe, but there's a pretty risky move to make. Well, I mean, you're gonna split it if you put both 5v5 and 6v6 in regardless. We also have tens of millions of new players that have only played 5v5. We want to be openly mindful not to frustrate those who like the game as it is today. The outcome of these tests would give us a lot of valuable information to consider moving forward. We'd run the test for a few weeks and gauge interest from the community. Then we'd measure the impact. Like 5v5, arcade, etc. We take the lessons from the playtest to see what we can learn about the mode, what's the current game ecosystem, and the future of Overwatch. We would reflect carefully on learning from whatever test run and explore how the best, whether that's a world of 5v5, 6v6, or even both. Thank goodness we're getting to the end of this. I'm losing my voice. I'm going to jump on a soapbox for a moment. When you look at the changes of Overwatch since its inception, it's clear that many of these have reduced some of the variety within Overwatch match. We get feedback for some players that Overwatch can feel the same from game to game. While much of this gets attributed to 5v5, we feel that there is more at play here. Besides running experiments with 6v6, we'd like to run some that re-examine the ways we tried solving previous problems, specifically with the goal of bringing some of the freedom back to an Overwatch match without the severity of issues that accompanied it. For instance, we think there could be other ways of putting a team together that aren't quite as rigid as a set composition, but not as loose as open queue. We'll be running at least one quick play hack based on this idea in Season 13. There are some gotchas to this direction, but after reading 400 pages of this blog, hope you're able to see the trade-offs. Your feedback. Also, I have not gotten one of those in-games, like surveys at all. I haven't seen one of those at all. Speaking of feedback, so ultimately the Overwatch team wants to continue building the game that you want to play season after season. You are finally being forced to do something, and you are posting this in the middle of Marvel Rivals open beta, literally happening right now from July 23rd to August 5th. So So they are considering 6v6. They are going to be working on it. They are going to be bringing us game modes, quick play hacks. The future, for once, looks a little bit brighter. Not too much about 5v5 tanks and rebalancing. For once, there is a light at the end of this tunnel. I look forward to it. And that will be everything for today because I am losing my fucking voice. I am tired. Just got back from Texas. I was in a car for 5 hours, dude. I'm done.